Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Welcome to another episode of The Rewind. Unfortunately, we are not a full team today as Omega had some last-minute stuff come up, but Theric is here once again to join me in our discussion around all things Pantheon and, of course, MMORPGs. So, episode 10. Wow. It's really flown by for me. If I'm completely transparent, this has easily become one of the most fun shows to record, produce, and get out there, just with everything that kind of plays into it. I can't thank those enough more who listen to us, and, working with Omega and Theric has been awesome. And here's to many, many more episodes. But, what are your thoughts, Theric? How does 10 feel? Is it special?
It feels pretty good. I'm so, happy that we got to 10 episodes. I feel like we leveled up. I feel like level 10, we should get some sort of epic ability, and our podcast now maybe gets a last name or something like that. So I've been having so much fun though. And it's, like you said, thanks to everybody who's enjoyed it. That's why we're going to keep doing these. Yeah,
we can put on our higher level gear now. We finally earned the right to do so.
Exactly.
But then people are going to expect a better show. So maybe not. I'm going to wear my low level gear until we're ready. Okay. But with that, let's go ahead and get started.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes.
So there was a lot of news in Pantheon this week because we were treated with a VIP roundtable. So we're going to start with that roundtable. Now, the roundtable was about an hour and a half long, so we can't go through everything. But I took little snippets of it, things that are that were discussed, and some of my thoughts on it. And Theric, feel free to jump in. But just some small things to talk through. And there's a good bit here, so we're going to get right into it. Now, the topic overall of the roundtable was NPC AI placement, dispositions, and things tied to it. I'm going to tell you that didn't really stay there because it was really open questions. So while that was the theory, we had Convo and Joppa available. And when those two guys are available, it's pretty safe to say we're going to get into a lot of questions. So they started, and they actually jumped back to one of the older streams, the Tower of the Reckless Magician, and how challenging the encounters were and how difficult the tuning was. And someone asked basically, is this what we should expect from Pantheon, or has it changed? And Joppa kind of explained that the level that we saw there was representative of what we should expect in having to play our classes, as well as the dimension of challenge. Now, the one thing he did say is that, it was rather one-dimensional because in that demo, the mobs were just really heavy damaging, right? And that's just one way to look at challenge, like really strong enemies. Now, it's going to be a lot more tied in the future to some of the combat systems that are evolving and to kind of push it past that singular dimension. He said that they should come together to kind of create unique systems. And that's kind of what I gathered from that conversation. So the challenge will still be there, but I don't think anybody just wants a challenge that's going to be, mobs hit hard. It's not really going to make the game very fun.
What he kind of said about it, I like the way he explained it. He talked about layers of challenge, right? Different aspects of challenge instead of just a straight up, numbers game where it's damage versus defense. Adding in the synergies we've seen in the other stuff and the other VR streams, and adding those aspects in is pretty cool.
Yeah, agreed. And then going further into the combat, they talked about dispositions, and they said that, someone had asked, will we see enemies with multiple dispositions? And Convo kind of said, the goal here is that the singular dispositions working well and how they envision them is really what they want. And that in the future, they're not going to roll out that enemies could get multiple dispositions. But they also use, someone had said, what if you're in mid combat? Can they all of a sudden, develop a disposition? And he said, unless the disposition's sort of built that way, like avenging, which means if a mob dies, the avenging mob gets stronger. That's going to obviously evolve through combat, but that typically the mobs are going to be pre-flagged for these scenarios, at least for now.
Yeah. There was an interesting piece about that is that he was very definitive. I mean, sometimes we get sort of middling answers just because they're uncertain or it's not a decided thing. But I really appreciated Convo's direct responses and some of his direct answers to some of the questions. That was a good example of one where he said, no, they won't have multiple dispositions. And there were a few others down the road that he said that about as well. So it was very informative, I thought.
I agree. It's nice to kind of just say, sometimes, you want to leave the door open, but sometimes it's important to also say at this point, this is it, just to be clear.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
shifting gears, they talked about mob density, and I actually like this conversation. They talked about how in different MMORPGs that some of the areas can become boring, or people won't be interested in them and thus not be active. And they specifically discussed how players, it's kind of an interesting way they answered it, I guess is the way to say it. They talked about how players push players to other areas, and that's in this open world concept in camping. And Joppa used an example in EQ, for example. He said when areas he wanted to camp were overpopulated, it kind of made him go explore. And one of the things he talked about was if it wasn't for that type of mechanic, like he would have never probably found Castle Mistmore. That wouldn't have been a place he went to, which I love Castle Mistmore. So he just basically said he was sort of pushed to discover that because what EQ did well is if there was something you really wanted and you couldn't get it, there were other areas to go to. And it seems like that's really what they want to do with Pantheon, is that they know that they need to have multiple areas to set up camp, and that, that it kind of isn't what you would think with how zones were sort of, and we're going to talk about this a little bit longer, but zones were sort of just this level to this level, like, wow. And that's why they die, because once you're not in that level, you don't go there. So they've talked a lot about how like camping and setting up camps can really push people to different areas in the game. And going further into that, into the player mitigation, they said it's not just camping spots for experience or gear that they're looking to do when it comes to player mitigation or migration, I guess you should say, is that it's also systems in the game like crafting and perception. These systems are going to have people go to different areas and be pushed around the world a little bit more. So interesting concept. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that very briefly here. But it's interesting how they kind of look at solving that, and also that they have the awareness that they don't want their zones to just die in the game, which I think is pretty important.
Joppa had a really good, just a quick thing. Joppa, when he talked about this, he was referencing his experiences on P99, on Project 99, because he was, he sort of framed it as doing research, right? And I think that's so valuable because these are a lot of the problems, like what they're talking about with player migration and level spread within a zone. You can really experience that in P99 still, and to go in there and sort of do some research, I think is pretty valuable.
Yeah. And we're going to get back to that very quickly here. So I'm going to just throw something in because we're trying to keep it in like a timeline form. So if you listen to this roundtable, you'll kind of be able to follow the timeline we've given you. There's going to be more detail and things that I didn't put in. But they touched briefly right after talking about that on the infamy system within the game. Now, this is a system I've heard by name, but I'm going to be open and honest. I'm not super familiar with like exactly what this system is. I understand it in the overarching, but I don't really understand exactly what they expect to do with this system. So it's kind of interesting that they hinted at this a bit, but they said that it's really going to play into raiding and a lot of the guild play. And it said, Joppa said specifically that this will allow you to push more difficulty and unlock perks through this system. And he gave an example that's pretty cool. So like if a guild gets their infamy level up enough, they may be able to actually summon an on-demand raid target. Big cooldown, something like that, which is kind of interesting. But it's a large part of apparently how they're viewing their guild system. And it's really exciting to kind of hear them putting systems into play that'll help guilds grow. I've been a big, like one of my early videos on guilds when I was with Hayat, this was a big thing for me. Like guilds need to have systems in the game to help them stay strong, because I think that, yes, it's up to the players and the guild leaders to make a guild, but if you give them tools, I think that that's super helpful. So they talked about this infamy system, and I think during it, Joppa even said, we probably need to do an entire roundtable on this system so people can understand it a bit more. Now, Theric, are you familiar with this infamy system other than just kind of hearing these little pieces every once in a while?
No, this was new to me too. I think that they made it, fairly. They talked about it on the. Quite honestly saying we haven't released a lot of information about this. So there isn't a lot of information out there about this. So I don't think anybody knows much about it at all. It's kind of interesting because, at this point, you sort of feel like all the systems that they're working on. And they did talk about some others later on in the roundtable as well. But this infamy system was quite new. And I'm interested to hear more about it because they were talking about it in the reference to like camping and how it can sort of play into the problems associated with camping and those issues. So definitely on my radar now.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And then, so from there, they kind of went back to that unpopular areas in the game, player migration, things like that. And they got a little more detailed in it. So in talking about like, people avoiding areas, he said that most zones are not going to be what we call flow zones. And that's what we were hinting at a little bit in the conversation ahead of time, where there's going to be like a small level spread. And he believes that this is why you see zones die in MMORPGs. Like I think of World of Warcraft in one of the original zones in Phalaris. Like, wow, I knew I was going to mess that up. Phalaris. That's the worst pronunciation ever. But that zone was like a very wooded area zone by the Wood Elves. And you went there for your level spread. And I can't think of another reason you would ever go back to that zone. So, and that's because it was a flow zone. When it was time to get that level, you went there, you did those quests. And then once you did it, you were gone. So in Pantheon, there's going to be a lot of reasons they were talking about for wide scale players to be in every zone. And they believe that this will help keep zones from dying. They also talked about how much they feel like climbing, which is an interesting thing here, will keep players, in zones looking around, because they said, even though that you can climb, that it's so new to the MMORPG genre in the way that they're doing it, that like they don't think that players are going to find stuff all the time right away, because of different climbing challenges or the requirements for it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I feel really good about that type of theory around keeping zones active, because I think those flow zones are the ones that I think if you look across any MMORPG are usually dead. So pretty interesting topic there. They touched next on basic quests in Pantheon. And this is important because, Theric, we actually brought this up on Pantheon Plus U. When people were talking, I think there's a lot of people that think the perception storylines is the same thing of like what questing is going to be. And I think that's where people get concerned about the difficulty or the ability to really look around. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's important that they mentioned it here. They talked about the differentiating between the perception storylines, tasks, and how those are different, right? The question, because it came up in the context of the question being, can I share quests with my group mates, my guild mates, other people, whatever? Yeah. And the answer was, storylines, no, but tasks, yes, right? Because they're now there was some caveats there as well, and Joppa did a good job of explaining them. But basically, the important takeaway was that there's a big difference.
Yeah. And to give you guys an idea, he calls tasks sort of what you would expect to be like normal quests that were in MMORPGs. Tasks are a bit more traditional, feature things like, collecting or killing, stuff like that you'd expect that a town may say to you, hey, this is what we need you to do. And those may be shareable, but they may still have tiers, right? Like, so you do a bunch of quests for someone and unlock some new quest. You might not be able to share that one that has prerequisites, but everything else will be shareable that doesn't. And kind of what you just said with perception is, and I love how much they talk about how complex the perception system is. And actually Joppa brought that up in our, in Pantheon Plus U about how like, it's not going to be that easy to just look stuff up online because there's going to be so many flags. And he went at that in this as well, where he just said, sharing something with perception is not going to work because of everything that you've done is what takes you through perception. You can't just share that with someone who hasn't done any of that. So pretty interesting.
I want to read actually, because I remember he said that during the show in the quote. I'm going to read what he said in chat. This regarding the complexity of the perception storylines and why you couldn't share them, or why spoilers and sort of write-ups are going to be really minimized or addressed. He said the depth of the flagging matrix will help with spoilers. The threads that develop Keeper A's experiences and outcomes will be different than Keeper B's because they are different characters doing different things in different places at different times, accumulating very different flags along the way. So just, he's basically speaking to it's the depth of the system and the complexity of the flagging system is what's really why you can't share a storyline, and B, why spoilers are going to be, the minimization of the spoiler culture that's out there.
Yeah, that was a really good, and I didn't share that one out on Twitter. And I think I forgot to clip that one. So thank you for reading that. That's a really good point and pretty telling to like the fear of the whole lookup culture that we have in MMORPGs right now. So really good stuff. So the next thing they talked about was camping. And this was funny because I think we saw a very slight like Chris eyebrow raise, Chris Joppa, when Kilson made a comment here. But the whole question was, how do you stop people from locking down camps and staying in the same areas all the time? So Japa again went back to some of his experiences on P99 and talked about how much he wanted to get Rubicite armor. So he was talking about like sitting there and camping for 24 hours. Like the question that you hear the Pantheon team ask a lot when it comes to designing this game is it fun? And that's the question he asked, like, is this fun? And he said, it's interesting because if you're the person sitting there, it's super fun. You don't want to leave. You have this carrot. You want to keep driving it, right? But if you want to get the camp and you don't have it, well, then that's not so fun. So how do we fix that? So it got into an evolved discussion around unique items that people will camp and entrench themselves into, and how to determine what the right amount of unique and difficulty is in getting these items. And are there variations that people can go get in different locations that maybe aren't as good, but maybe it doesn't take as much time? So it's funny because Kilson then jumped in and he said, there's only a couple of different ways to address a camp. You could have that social experience and ask to join the camp. And then, you make friends, and that's phenomenal. That's a lot of what we talk about with Community Matters. But then he said, well, then if you can't and they don't want to let you in, or they've been there for a long time and you want that camp, you just take it. And he was talking about like mezzing mobs and stuff. And Japa was funny because he's like, well,
yes. he kind of walked it back a little bit, and he was like, well, slow down there. Maybe that's not exactly what we want, but we want something like that.
Yeah. And he kind of in quotes said, it's how we handle that is one of the quotes he uses is there's a lot of things they have on their plate that they want to do. And it's really going to require testing and seeing it in action. So they have a lot of plans. And he said that they're not, locked in 100% to a singular way to handle it. And he used the example of, trying to figure out like how to claim mobs. So for outside of raid content, most damage on a mob is going to take that mob. Whereas in raid content, first to engage. So they kind of said, well, this is probably the best way to do that. And he also said that like the camp stealing side of a PvP server may be a little more understood and expected than on a PvE server. And that was an important thing that I think he separated between. And he said that camp stealing may not really work into the regards of what their philosophies around the game would be on a PvE server. And he said that, what they want the experience to be essentially. They talked about the fact that the reasoning that camping has become so hardcore, again, is because it was the only way to get that specific item. And he's just really talking about like how to put it on different mobs, how to have the item itself float between different enemies in the zone, multiple camp spots, have rare spawn in multiple locations. So there's a lot of different things that they can do to sort of fix that. So you can have multiple people camping the same thing in different areas. And I don't think that's a very bad thing. I think that's actually pretty smart and might make it even more rare because you could camp one area for a while and never see it if another group's not camping another area to kill it. And they even talked about how like if you got a rare piece of loot with modern technology, it could be flagged that that's not going to drop for you and your group, for another 24, 48 hours, which means there's no reason to sit there and keep camping.
Some good points there. One of the things he also said, it's just acknowledging the trade-off that, if you are going to put a, sort of unique or epic piece that everybody wants in a few different places, yes, you trade off some of the epicness, for lack of a better word, of that item, but at the cost of, preventing this sort of, camp lockdown mentality and all the problems that go along with that. So I think, he's got a good sort of understanding of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it's definitely hard these days with everything people know, with all the quality of life's put in, to recreate open world because it's been so shut off for so long. So it does take a lot of planning and a lot of theory to be able to do that. And it seems like they have a lot of thought investment put into that right now. So there's a very quick note about states, which were brought up in the Shaman stream, if you guys remember. And I remember the community said, can NPCs put states on you? Can they use that state system to take advantage and combo with different enemies they're with? And Japa said, of course. Real bluntly, yes, was his answer. So that's fun to know that the combat systems we'll be using will be used there. So the last part here that they asked in detail, and we're going to do a couple quick notes, but the last detailed part that I wanted to highlight here was crafting. So they asked, and this is something, we did the show on crafting, and Nafal, who's a great member of the community, talks about crafting a lot. And everybody knows that Corey left the team, who was in charge of the crafting system. So somebody asked, where is crafting in development right now? And they basically said that They haven't shared a lot, obviously, since Corey left the team. But he clarified that Corey did a great job of setting the system up and that they have all the work he's done, which has also obviously involved others on the team. He didn't do it by himself. And Joppa said that the crafting system at the moment doesn't have a dedicated designer, but that it's very robust and thoroughly designed at this point. So it looks like the work that Corey did was, it's a usable, great system. It's going to need testing and such, but they're at a state right now where they're able to put in more deep implementation into it for testing and, building, changing, etc. He said that the crafting is a deep desire system, is the way he defined it, as for the community. And he understands how important it should be. And what I think crafters should really feel good about is he said that, they said that just like perception, the care and passion that's put into perception, that crafting will have that same care and perception. So I thought that felt really good. Theric, what did you think about that?
Well, to be perfectly honest, hearing that there isn't one person currently dedicated to developing the crafting system or working with the crafting system does concern me. Not gonna lie, I'd like to hear that, we have somebody working on it. And because as the rest of the game evolves, as they continue to develop the rest of the game, I think the crafting system, needs to be looked at or cared for as the game develops in other areas, because you want that integration. So that is a concern. I know how important it is, and I can only say is that the only thing I can say is that we just have to have faith, I guess, that they are going to attend to it with the care that we hope they do.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. So I'm going to read through a couple quick notes and we'll wrap up our discussion here on the roundtable, just taking a good portion of our show today. But the quick notes here, the caravan system will not be a goal for launch. They're very hard in saying it's something after launch. So everyone who knew about that system. Someone asked, will there be hidden chests and items? And they said, yes, for sure. They love the exploration around it. So they asked as well, skipping systems in the game with climbing is a fine example. They said, if you're skipping mobs to get to a boss or something like that. But when it comes to combat exploiting, which I think what people are most worried about, they said that, they're going to have ways around that. Number one, mobs that are able to attack will. And he uses this term, which I love. I've never heard it, lerping. He said that
that was either.
Yeah. So
I've heard that before.
If a bear can't, range attack you because a bear doesn't spit venom unless it's a venom spitting bear, that mob will just teleport right to you, just lerp right to you. Right. And he's like, I'm fine with that. Sometimes that's going to have to be how it is. You can't cheat combat. But for the most part, what they're trying to develop is mobs that will use ranged attacks, or a bear could roar and knock you off a wall, or bump into a wall and knock you off a wall. So there's a lot of things that they're trying to make sure that climbing is a positive experience and not an exploitative, experience. The next point here is one of the most important part. There was a joke about the Eagles and Cowboys, and Convo's a big Eagles fan, and it was making fun of the Cowboys. So what we learned from this is that Convo is really still jealous about all the early day success the Cowboys have had. And I just feel bad, as an Eagles fan, to live under such oppression, knowing that your team will never be as good as the Cowboys. So I love you, Convo. I'm sorry that you picked such a bad team to support, but we're good for you, buddy.
Yeah, well, we got our revenge, or when we did the fantasy draft, the Pantheon plus U draft, and he didn't get to take part. I know he was choked about that, right? He said that.
Now
I heard that from Ronak.
Yeah. Now you're gonna get me in trouble. The next one here is a question that I posed, actually. So the rogue rope. I was like, with all the climbing that is going on, and all this skills, if everybody can climb everything, why is this rogue rope as important? All of a sudden, when we see someone climbing trees and doing everything, so help me understand why the rogue rope is so important. And Joppa jumped into this pretty well. He said that the rogue is going to have natural abilities, first of all, to climb better than any other class. He talked about how you can get better at climbing, making sure that you're not just climbing one wall to max your skill over and over, and that perhaps the skill leveling system is going to be limited to growth per day or something around time measurement. They also said how rogues are going to be able to max out climbing earlier or have less restrictions on leveling their climbing prowess, for example. They also discussed items that could enhance climbing, but they said usually the rogue is still going to be ahead of others because they'll always have that advantage. And then they can use the rope to help others overcome the achievements that they can't. Whether it's a more difficult wall to climb or it's so big that they don't have the endurance to do it, where the rogue will be able to help. Now, the rogue rope itself is going to be channeled for people to climb. And it can be channeled indefinitely over time and you can even improve the length of the rope over time, which is it's really cool. However, if a rogue takes damage, the climbing group will fall. Or if the rogue just stops channeling, the climbing group will fall. And he left with a quote, "Trust your rogue."
Yes, I've never been more concerned for my Pantheon experience than when I heard that quote.
I got you, boo.
Yeah, you better get me. You better hold on to that rope, man. I'm going to be pissed if you let go of that rope.
Can you imagine if you kill people and they lose experience? Oh, man, rogues are going to be hated.
Sorry, guys, I got to go. Psh, rope.
It should say not trust your rogue. Be very nice to your rogue is what it should say. Corpses and dragging corpses is still a thing. Somebody asked about that. Someone said, with mastery, how do you balance fights? Whereas like someone may go into the fight with less mastery and someone may go with more mastery. And quite frankly, Joppa just said there shouldn't be a balance. Like simple as that. If you go in with higher mastery, you're going to be stronger. If you don't have a lot of mastery, you're going to be weaker like that. And I think that's perfect.
Yep.
So, and then the last question asked was, will NPCs of certain classes have the full skill set that the players will, depending on level, I'd assume. And the answer was yes, which is really crazy to think about how nuts that could get, which I love. So that was it from the roundtable. Again, that was a pretty long explanation for the beginning of the show here. We took about 25 minutes to cover that, but the show itself is about an hour and 25 itself. So that'll give you guys a lot of the good details, but go back and check that out if you'd want to see more. Now, you also brought up the quote, which I really appreciate because I didn't have that one clipped from Joppa on Pantheon Plus U. We wanted to share with you very quickly a couple quotes. These are directly from Joppa on the Pantheon Plus U show, where we dissected the storylines, the perception storylines video. And there were some really important things he said. So obviously the one that Theric just said earlier was about how the system itself is going to be very in-depth with flagging and it won't make it easy to just look stuff up, which I love. So here's a couple more. One of our community members, Shade Stomp, asked, he mouses over a lot of mushrooms and only one set seems to have a clicky. He's talking about when Ben was looking for some of the indicators. And this was a huge issue on forums and on Reddit where people were really upset. Like, how do I know to click that mushroom? And Joppa came and responded in our chat and said the following. This is a direct quote. Important point here. I'm setting up this demo for this video. We hooked up a few of those mushroom patches. The intent is that if a type of mushroom is what you're meant to find, they will all be interactable. I think that was a huge sigh of relief that it won't be difficult. If you're supposed to find mushrooms, you can click on any of the mushrooms, which is pretty good. Now, going further, another member of the community, Schlocky, said, Joppa, will the mouse hover icon only show up if you're far away from it? Or will it show up if you're far away from it? Or is there a required distance? He said, because if the required distance, people will just kind of use their mouse across the zone to try to find those spots, so to speak. So Joppa very easily just said there will be a distance component to the hover icon, which is nice to hear. The next one was a little of a different part of that, but Bronson, one of our community members, said, I love this stuff, but I have one question. Can I get high enough level to come back and kill all these Spriggan and use their bones for kindling? And very simply, Joppa said at Bronson, yes, you can. Which is
great.
Which is why you see the sword icon when you hover them sometimes. And then the last quote here that I think just will make a lot of people smile. There was a conversation about climbing and somehow we got into talking about flying mounts. I don't even remember how. And Joppa made a quote here and said, as long as I'm here, Pantheon will never have flying mounts. It's pretty bold
and
statement.
The crowd rejoiced.
Yes. So some pretty good stuff there. So the last piece here for the VR news, which is again taking quite a bit of our show today, is their Twitter news. We always try to talk about what they talked about on Twitter. And they asked, what's the worst game mechanic you've ever had experience with and why was it so bad? So Lexer said target locking in EQ2. Micah said vertical progression, especially when the treadmill is crazy fast, like outdating every 3 months or so. So just like kind of that constant replacement of gear and stuff like that. Jim on Twitter said, 2 great answers, scaling and forced PvP. I cannot stand either, and I will never buy a forced PvP game. I agree. He also said he didn't like coin weight, though. I don't agree with that. So, Jason Revel, this one I couldn't disagree with more. I'm curious on your thoughts, Theric, but he said RNG. What? You can't take out all RNG. That's what these games are based on.
Yeah, there's got to be some RNG. I've had this discussion in the context of Hearthstone, good RNG versus bad RNG, and there's a whole discussion there. But there always has to be some, unless you're playing chess. There's always RNG.
Yeah, yeah. The CM or C McCarthy said, crafted items with different random stats every time. If a character wants to make something a profession, should be able to make it for them with a purpose. That's an interesting one too, because I kind of like if the making of an item is based on how many you've made or like your skill set, and there's like a min-max possibility. I kind of like that. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I see the point too. It's not a terrible thing.
Yeah, I threw in that I absolutely hated the single player forced story of Final Fantasy XIV. I've talked about that forever, so I won't do it again. Project Valhalla said forced PvP is the worst ever. Completely agree. Lilith says she has a lot of these, but hates level scaling. It doesn't make sense to get to max level and struggle to kill things if you go back to starter zones. Yes, agreed. I can't play ESO because of that. Chris here said EverQuest corpse runs. Chris, we might have that again, so sorry to tell you that. Zoo, who's been on our shows quite a bit here, says infinite progression systems in general. I like to feel like I'm done and move on. I actually don't like that either. I like to keep building, to keep growing. In a game that I'm going to play for hours and hours and hours, I kind of want to keep getting better. Andre Lebon said, I'm torn between tedious timer locked dailies and forced PvP. Definitely forced PvP is the worst. Tommy K. Hart said action combat, which is interesting. It's not much. It just doesn't like the play style, I guess you'd say. I can't pronounce this one, but it's Kurami. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. WoW loot. This is an interesting one. He said he doesn't like the WoW loot rolls, like need, greed, etc. If they were going to make the rolls for pure fairness, which it isn't fair, but it should be dice purely. That's an interesting concept. Just luck of the dice. I don't know. I kind of like the fact that if someone doesn't need something, they shouldn't have the same rights to get it as someone who does.
Yeah, kind of feel that way too.
Yeah. Nico the Insane, the overuse of ease of travel. I get that people don't want to wait 30 minutes for the boat, but it was a part of the game. Oh, I love that. That's so true. The first time I got on a boat in Butcher Block Mountains, it was just unbelievable to me. Dr. Nageshi says, I hate having to sim my new equipment on an external site to see if it's improvement. Cough, cough, wow. Well, we all know I love that, but I get it. I can understand it. A couple more here. Zane Stream says, in MMO games, it'd have to be stealth. This one hurts my heart. You guys can see I will put stuff in here I don't agree with if it's a good point. I think stealth can have its place in MMOs, but if there's PvP, it always throws the balance off. PvP is horrible. So it's either valued by the devs too highly, or thus the classes with it are left weak. I don't care because I play these games for PvE. So it's a little harsh way to say it.
I agree.
Brandon said, I'm not a fan of transmogs and costumes. Well, Brandon, I'm not a fan of you. I'm kidding. I'm just joking. I totally understand it.
That's funny.
Yeah, he says not everyone should run around looking like a badass. Well, you know what, Brandon? I should. I don't know why me, but we'll get into that another time. And Draw My Character says, this answer is so easy. Sitting on hours and end, staring at the ground, waiting for an NPC or item to pop. Camping is essentially how I read that. So a lot of different things there. A lot of things that are in Pantheon, a lot of things that aren't in Pantheon. So interesting. But that pretty much wraps up the community and a long run there of VR news and notes and what they're doing. So Theric, I'm going to toss it over to you.
When the community speaks, we listen. Let's dig into social media and see what they're talking about.
Okay. So with the PantheonMMO.com forums this week, I wanted to do a little bit of a lighter topic. I think we could all use a laugh right now with all the stuff that's going on in the world. So the forum post that I'm going to go with is titled, Where Did You First Die in Game, Not in Real Life? And it's posted by Stonefish. So here's how he framed the question. He noted, in EQ or any other MMO, where was your first go, and then surprise, you're dead. So like many of you, it may have been the first time you were standing in front of an NPC guard and you went to type anything and the auto attack triggered. So for him, it was near the Bard and the lifts area of Kelethin, I think is what he's talking about there. So I honestly laughed out loud reading some of these because they are pretty hilarious. So here's some of the first MMO deaths stories from the community. Renarius said, not counting accidentally attacking NPCs in Calathon, my first death was when my friend and I were out exploring, and he shouts in group chat, look, an orc, let's get him. And about 10 seconds later, we were both dead. That's when I first learned that exploring can be dangerous. Kellenen had a similar thing. He said, I died to an orc pawn. I had no idea they were so strong compared to everything else around Felwith. Vijek said he goes back to sort of what Stonefish was saying in his original post, saying, I think whatever key was bound to attack was what a character would likely use to type their initial hello or hail to the guildmaster shortly after character creation in EverQuest 1. In any case, same as the above, my guildmaster promptly killed me after I pressed the key. Good times. And there's a few similar stories here. One by Vandrad. And he said, Greater Fadark. Somewhere in Calathon, because I forgot to enter into chat mode before hailing an NPC, got the H off just fine, but then the A ended up with me dead. Isn't that great?
So good, yeah.
That's happened to so many people. Disposalist said, I'm pretty sure something similar will be the death of most EQ players was his first. And so he said, almost certainly targeting the Priest of Discord, typing H, A, I, and forgetting to type the slash, and then auto-attacking the Priest of Discord. And this is why there were so many corpses always surrounding the Priest of Discord, because he was, it's happened so many times. So Mordecai went a different route. He said Skelly's in Butcher Block Mountains was already half dead, and I figured I could win. Well, think again. Doford said, I don't remember when I first died. I first played in Greater Fadark, killed by Skellies, orcs, guards, bats, wasps, and falling off Calathon.
Falling off Calathon. Yes, sir.
Oh, I know. There was a lot of things that could kill you in early EverQuest. The days when they weren't afraid to kill people was a good thing. Unicron said, it's been so long, it's hard to remember specifics, but since UO was my very first MMO, I bet it was to some griefer or ganker in PvP. One that I do remember clearly was taking a wrong turn somewhere in Star Mud, or Star MUD, which is actually not one I'm familiar with, and instantly dying to a xenomorph. So if you know about that mud, then that might resonate with you. Nefel said, I don't remember the first time I died in a mud, but there were many. In Ultima Online, I was PK'd the first time I set foot outside town. I'm going to talk about it in a second, but this was my experience in Ultima Online for sure. I died the second I stepped into the wilderness. Anyway, Nefel goes on to say, in EverQuest on day one, it was to a bat outside Kinos at night. It was pitch black. I couldn't see, and suddenly I'm getting attacked. After that, I went and bought a torch. Everett said, I can't remember the first, but the first stupid one I made was attacking a wisp without a magic weapon. So my body fed the forest that day in Calathon, and ultimately my half-elf warrior got deleted because I could never find it. I got mad, created a ranger instead. So Everett, that might have sucked at the time, but in the long run, you made a better choice.
Here we go. Nice.
Yeah, just saying. You was a better experience down the road for you. I guarantee it. Ixar said it was either to a bear or a wolf right outside Surefall Glade, shortly after spending a very long time trying to figure out how to get out of the tunnel in pitch darkness. I was hooked from then on. So, you see a trend in these responses. Dying in game, it doesn't stop people from playing. It keeps them playing sometimes.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, that's true. It's very true.
Yeah, actually, exactly. Arizons said Ultima Online, killed by a rat in Britain sewers. In EverQuest, a skeleton in the old offline tutorial. He died in the offline tutorial was my first experience. Pretty funny. The next story I really like. This is Azura Filth. He said, I'm not entirely sure if this was my first death, but surely my most memorable. I'd been playing Silk Road Online, which is a huge pain in the ass Korean grinder type MMO, and was really careful in not dying, as this would have resulted in a loss of experience and a 5% chance to drop any item. While trying to complete a generic Slay X 1,000 times quest, I randomly had this huge ass unique boss spawn right next to me. Obviously, I panicked and I tried to get as far away as possible. On my way out, I came across a heroic healer and got mauled. Or I came across a heroic healer that got mauled in his futile attempt to save me. This is how I met one of my very first in-game friends.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, that's the kind of social stuff that I hope Pantheon brings back. Valhalla said he kept it simple. Place, Surefall Glade. Race, human. Occupation, ranger, newbie. Death by drowning. It did not open my inventory, could not see anything. Video settings were a new thing to him at the time. The gamma was way down, I guess. Walked, fell off the little catwalk into the pond, can't see anything but a dark screen, and all I hear is gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. I love my rangers, but we did die a lot early on. We were not the most rangery kind of people early on.
Oh, it's so funny.
Isn't it? Okay, so Shadowbound talked about being introduced to EverQuest by friends and guildmates, and then it was coming from Ultima Online. He started a gnome mage. He was ported to Misty Thicket by one of his guildmates to join two real-life friends that were leveling there. He got too confident, went to the other side of the wall, which apparently splits the zone, and there were guards that were necromancers that were always camped near a log there. He swiftly got owned. He hadn't bound in Riverdale, so he ended up back in Akanon after respawning and couldn't get a port back. So this was his first death in EQ, and in an MMO, it was trying to actually steal or pickpocket from the Britain Bank in Ultima Online, and he got his butt handed to him by the guards. Naked thieves, pickpockets everywhere at the bank.
That's awesome.
Now, the next one is, I think this is a WoW story, so correct me if I'm wrong, but this is from Jothan. He said, my first stroll on Eastham Beach, a zone much bigger than I should have been in. The first mob I attacked was an Azure Nomi, or Azure Gromny. The moment I saw that, my attack had done all of 1 hit point of damage. I knew I made a huge mistake. I made it almost back to town before it killed me, which at least made it easy to recover my corpse.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. I don't think that's WoW. Those zones don't ring a bell in that monster type, but I could be wrong. I didn't play much Horde, so that's interesting though. And if he ran that far, it probably wasn't WoW because they would have just left him alone.
Yeah, that's right. Bolda said, my first death was in Neriak Forest by the big log. Some scarab or spider didn't like me. I think the first 5 deaths were actually there when I camped for a while, and then I didn't kill anything by that stage. Jobson said, starting zone, Tox Forest. How hard could a yellow con actually be? Bam Bam finished it off. He said, when I finally made it to my real life mates in Greater Fadark as my Ogre Warrior, when I finally made it to my real life mates in Greater Fadark as my Ogre Warrior, only to get sent on a 6-hour walk back to the swamps the first time I saw a guard. So, yeah. So for me, I referenced it earlier as Ultima Online. I stepped outside Britannia, it was open season basically for everybody to get PK'd, and I did. For me, though, the most memorable one was in EverQuest. Blackburrow was my first real dungeon, and there's a snake pit in Blackburrow that I think killed off a lot of early players, and that was me included. So my first character, I lost my corpse, everything that I had on it from killing bats and snakes in Kinos Hills, but I learned my lesson, and real MMOs teach you to respect the environment. So lots of funny stories in there, but minus, what about you? Do you remember your first time dying in an MMO?
I don't remember my first time. I'm sure it was somewhere outside of Freeport, but I feel like I made a half elf or a wood elf first, probably. And I definitely remember falling off Calathon, because you couldn't see the ledges. You had to look down and be really careful. And I would think I was good, and I would fall off. So probably I would say that was probably the first time I died. Now playing my first main, which was a dark elf wizard, I remember just running across the wrong type of guard, and just running for your life because you didn't realize there was a faction hit, because you were evil. What was that guard who used to run around? Sergeant Slate?
Slade killed a ton of people right outside the East Commons area there.
Yeah, he was a nightmare, especially when I was trying to get to the Commons with my Dark Elf, to trade or do. And that guy shows up and I'm running for my life. So yeah, that was fun.
Faction was a lot of people's death sentence in EverQuest.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we do, we're going to stop by and see new introductions from new members of the community. I actually had somebody message me just on the forum saying they really liked hearing these. So it's we're going to keep it going strong with a few introductions. First, Energon5 said, hey, all, new pledge here. Excited to be able to lend what little I can to the development of this game. I never played much of EQ, but followed it and tried Final Fantasy 11 as well. He was an avid WoW player. He says, he hopes that's not blasphemy to say that.
It is not blasphemy. You are okay. You are welcomed by us.
Yes, absolutely. And I've let him know that as well. So he says, he's jumped around to other games quite a bit. Looking forward to something with a bit more depth. Can't wait to find a group of people to play with. And as of now, nobody I know he knows is planning on playing, but hopes that change. So see you guys in the future. And then also Evokaz, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but he said, hi, everyone. I've heard about Pantheon here. And here and there over a year, and I saw Co play it recently. Watched a few of the dev streams. Definitely find myself wanting the game to succeed. He never had the opportunity to play EverQuest at its peak, so he definitely wanted to. He was into Star Wars Galaxies, which he says had a great non-instance housing system and social aspects, and that's what helped pull him into that game's universe. So he's looking at the dev streams, he's seeing things he likes, and the most recent one, the one we talked about earlier, story, environment, and NPC interactions really gave him a sense of hope and seeing the progression. So looking forward to it. And lastly, Chris said, "Hi everyone, it's nice to meet you. I came across this game in extreme hopes that resembles my all-time favorite game, EverQuest Online Adventures, which we've heard about before. He played it from the time he was 10 until he was 16. He was addicted, and he's watched a few of the dev streams as well, and he's definitely feeling optimistic about Pantheon's progress. It's been so long since we had an MMO that didn't follow just what every other MMO is doing and tries to sort of do something different, which 100% I agree with. So if you guys want to pop in over at the forums and just say a quick hello, I'm sure that they would appreciate that."
Awesome. Welcome.
Definitely. So in lieu of Reddit and Facebook this week, I want to actually highlight a blog series by a friend of the show, Draq. We've talked about Draq before. He has a site, pantheonblog.com. So as you guys know, the EverQuest Aradune server launched last week, and there were a lot of people that were looking forward to it. We talked about it on the show. So Draq was one of those folks, and he went and documented his experiences in a really well-constructed way. He did a series on his blog called Adventures in Aradune. I've left a link in the description if you guys want to go and read it. I'll give you a bit of a Cole's notes though. It says, so parts 1 through 3 basically document everything from the initial login experience, or non-experience for what was for a lot of people.
Very true.
through his group's journey to mid-level. It's a fun read filled with lots of screenshots from his group, and they are getting rare drops. They're progressing towards their goals, and it's some good nostalgia for those of us that didn't take the trip over to Aradune. But unfortunately, it didn't end well for their group. The fourth entry in his blog is called How the Adventure Died. And it's really a cautionary tale, and I think an important read for everyone who's in this community and following Pantheon, because we can easily forget the problems that a shared world engenders. And I don't want to spoil the article, but basically it involves camping, training, and some player bans. So I think the takeaway is that MMOs like EQ and what Pantheon aims to be require active GM involvement. And, they had talked about on Aradune how that was one of the features of this new server, was that they were going to have, GMs sort of more present. But, that remains to be seen, I guess. I want to give you a brief quote of what Draq said to sort of conclude his article. He said, quote, for future open world MMORPGs like Pantheon, I hope you take great care in dealing with people and passing out judgment. Please don't just look at a screenshot and press the ban button for 7 days. That's not community building. That's not making our game feel like a world, and it's not an enjoyable game experience. If you place us in an open world, there will be tension, and you should be prepared for it. For the love of holy paladins, at the very least, inform people before you ban them. Preferably, get both sides of the story as well. Don't just punish the group that hits back, and don't let the trolls win. Do better. So that's his quote at the end, and I strongly recommend everyone go over there and read that and check it out. Minus, did you get a chance to read through his blog series there?
Yeah, I did, and I actually responded to specifically the one where you talked about how they got banned. And again, I won't go into all the details, but someone essentially tries to take their camp, they fight back, and then the other group that tried to steal their camp submits them for ban to a GM, and it's just and it's just ridiculous because that's the culture we live in now, right? The I'm going to provoke you to do something wrong, and then I'm going to blame you. And I definitely hope Pantheon can learn a little bit from that. I think that's a really nice piece he put together that those developers can read and really understand and make sure not to make that mistake again. As far as the Aradune experience as a whole, like I was excited to play that, but then, with the new job, that's going to delay us a bit with some stuff. Like I just realized I wasn't going to have the time, and it seems like the greatest thing that ever happened because it seems miserable. I would have probably been really frustrated with that experience that I've been hearing about, but more power to him for sticking through it.
Yeah, I just feel bad for people that were really looking forward to it, and the problems that seem to have come along with it. But hopefully they can sort that out, and they can read feedback like this and make adjustments. And hey, if you're going over to Draq's site, get a Pantheon profile done of yourself while you're there. He does those that are really cool. And that's it for this week's community discussions.
Just what are those creators up to out there?
All right, so we've already talked a lot about some of the stuff we've done here at Pantheon Plus. There's not a lot to talk about in the community creators section, but the basic gist of it is that, you know, we have our new show, Rank 'em. Last week, it was NathanNapalm joined Micah and myself. We talked about some of our favorite loot memories across MMORPGs, and you guys can check that out 9 p.m. on Tuesday nights. Now, we're not going to have a show next week. We'll get into this a little bit more, but when we get back the prior week after that, we will be discussing the best video game villains, which was actually voted upon by the community. And that's how we get our topics. That's going to be pretty fun. And Nathan on live air volunteered himself to be part of that one because he's excited about that topic. So he'll be joining us again for that. That's now moving fun. That should be good. I already have like 3 of them, but I got to think of 2 more. Moving over to Plus U, we've talked a little bit about it already. We broke down that Perception storyline stream, and we've given you some of the quotes from Joppa. But the community was really active in that. That was a really fun stream. Theric, you were a part of that as well. So definitely check that out. If you haven't yet, you'll be able to watch that now on demand on YouTube. So that was a good show. I really enjoyed that one.
Me too.
I just want to thank everyone who signed up for our website. Obviously, that launched a couple weeks ago. You've taken part in checking it out, signing up, providing feedback. We have a lot of really good updates that are pending testing on our beta site right now. That's going to add some customization and a couple other things we're very excited about. So keep your eyes peeled and check back with us. You can obviously look at the site, but we'll announce all the big changes. But there's a lot of really big changes that are going to add a lot more community to the site coming up. I'm excited about. And as we mentioned above, so this upcoming week, I will personally be out of town from this Sunday. So if you're listening to this today, through Saturday of the following week there. So it's going to put me out of business for about a week. Now, I looked at some ways to try to maybe take some stuff with me to do some content. It's just not feasible, and it's not going to be at the level that we'd expect it to be at. So I think even though we had taken a break a couple weeks ago, that really wasn't a break. We put out like 4 videos, redid all our branding, and did a ton of stuff. So this is actually going to be a real break. So we will not have a Rank 'em, a Plus U, or a Rewind. It'll be the first time we don't have a Rewind, but we'll be right back at it the week after. Bazgrim put out a few things. He sent out, if you're part of his email campfire that he sends out that kind of recaps some of the stuff he's been up to, that came out and hit our mailboxes. But also he put out a video just recently about NPC AI, which he kind of talks about some of the stuff on the roundtable we talked earlier and puts it together with some other content. So you can check that out on YouTube or Pantheon.plus, of course. And last, just Battle Axe Theater. I want to give them a big shout out. Congratulate Def and Punk for hitting 1K subscribers on YouTube. It's a great step for them. It allows them to have a lot more features. For those of you that don't know what that means, it gives them some features to help with the community and communication. So I really look forward to seeing them grow. And last week, they actually returned with Bat Live, which is on Monday nights at 9 p.m. You can check that out. But they talked about the direction and future of MMORPGs. So pretty big topic there for people to discuss. So that's it for the content creators for this week.
The Plus in Pantheon Plus. Here's your MMORPG news.
So Minus and I are going to try and do justice to Omega's notes here. You guys know that he does those deep dives into the genre news, and we will do our best Omega impression here, but certainly not the same not having him here. So first up, New World. The New World devs put out an update on their website, and it basically was a write-up all about items in the world. And it gave us a better look at what sorts of things we'll be finding and using in the world that New World takes place. So nothing too earth-shattering in terms of things we'll be using, but it's a very typical MMO fare, things like potions, tinctures, food and drink. They wrote about weapon coatings and how those will give bonuses to certain enemies. There looks to be like 5 tiers of items and then 5 rarities within those tiers. So there's a library of potential perks that one can roll on an item. The higher up the rarity you get, and the more perks it can have. Everything except named legendaries. Those all have set stats, but you can find them for any level in the game, and they aren't locked to the end game levels. The other item on the update that they put out talked about armor weight and equip load. So everything in the game has weight, every item, but you have your total weight limit you can carry and the weight of your equipped items. The equip weight scale affects your mobility, or states of the equip load, which are light, normal, and heavy. In parallel, there are 3 weight categories of armor: light, medium, and heavy. Wearing all light armor will keep you in the fast movement state, whereas wearing all medium armor will place you squarely in the normal movement state. And wearing all heavy armor, you're now in the heavy movement state. So alongside with the mobility bonus, light armor also has higher magical elemental mitigation, where the heavy armor is all about physical defense, with again medium being somewhere in the middle. So New World is still slated for August 25th launch, and lots of community speculation about the beta starting sometime in late June or early July. So that's a little update about New World.
Awesome. And I'll jump in here to give an update about the game Valar, the one that obviously we're big fans of and have played quite a bit and streamed. But they put out a newsletter, so to speak, to kind of give everyone some ideas on what future testing is going to look like. And I'm just going to read it. It's not super long. So they said, today marks the end of Pre-Alpha 2.1 weekend. It was a lot of fun, and we want to say thank you to everyone who joined and played with us. A huge thank you to everyone who dedicated to pledge and start supporting Valar. This greatly helps us, and we cannot thank you enough for it. On top of this, we once again had a big list of amazing bug reports, feedback, suggestions, and ideas on how to improve the game in general. Be sure that each of these are being read, noted, and will directly affect Valar's development. Because of you, Valar becomes better. So what does this mean for future test sections? Well, in organization, we decided to start a series of monthly tests for Valar. We will now engage ourselves to have open server at least once a month for our backers to get in. We plan on doing this usually at the last weekend of each month, but are not forced to do so. And then they said, what will testing be? Or what will be tested? After feedback from multiple people, we've decided to start a series of targeted test environments. Until now, each test was the early progression, progressed from what was wiped from a previous test, and would be wiped again at the end of the test, having to craft your armor, weapons, level up, archetypes, and so on. While we've had a lot of fun doing so and playing with others, exploring, killing world bosses, and so on, we understand that this can become redundant and might not be as interesting to do over and over again during testing. This is why, starting with the next test, we'll be focused on specific elements to test. This will include dungeons, raids, PvP arenas, world PvP, battlegrounds, player housing, guild territory building, guild wars, etc. Each of these elements will be tested either separately or together depending on the setup, and will allow for our players to quickly get into the action. We'll be providing level up boosts, allowing you to start at a specific profession or archetype level, and in most cases, we'll be providing gear from vendors. In the future, we will from time to time go back to a more general type of test where a lot of the systems are put together in one or multiple zones, allowing us to keep tweaking the experience values and progress of the archetypes and professions, as this is obviously very important to get right. But for the meantime, we will stay away from it and have fun on other things. We hope that you'll be excited about this and our approach to future testing. Let us know on our forums or Discord. And as always, thank you for being here with us. We look forward to being in Valar again with you very soon, Quasar Studios. And I'd also like to note that Dr. Greenspoon did reach out to me, and we confirmed that the next test, bearing any incidents, will be the 26th of this month. So pretty exciting stuff there to hear that, we're going to get to see some different things, experience some different things, dig into some of the systems a bit more. So I'm excited for any future tests.
Yeah, we had so much fun again the second time when we played this. Me, you, Lexer, and a couple other folks as well, and with Dr. Greenspoon as well. I'm a terrible tester because I have too much fun playing this game. So I don't send I don't send the bug reports that I probably should be. I know you do. You're way better at this than I am. I'm just too I'm too involved in the experience, having a great time, and so yeah, bad testing, Theric.
Well, hey, whenever they put a map system and tracking system in, we'll make sure you're one of the testers.
Oh my God, please. Okay, so next up on the list is an update on a game that I was really interested in. I have in my Steam library and I played, but it's Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. So this was an older game, and it's not an MMO, and it wasn't, but it was certainly a genre-defining RPG back in 2012. Now this game's getting a remaster, which is being dubbed Re-Reckoning. I'm not sure if that name will stick, but anyway, officially announced on Friday, Kingdoms of Amalur was one of the best, if not the best, out-of-nowhere amazing RPGs from a totally unknown studio. It had great combat. It had a good storyline. It was actually written by R.A. Salvatore, who's a very well-known author in the sort of D&D Forgotten Realms universe. And it also featured production and artwork by Todd McFarlane, who of course created the Spawn comics and that universe. So it started out actually as an MMO. If you think back in the day, the whole project did start out as an MMO, but over time the genre in general was in a rough place at the time, and they made the decision to turn it into a solo RPG. And now there's been rumblings for a while that the MMO for Kingdoms of Amalur was being worked on again. And there were also rumors of a remaster that have been swirling around. So now we know the remaster is on its way. So maybe rumors of an MMO are being revived as well. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But Omega wanted to give a shout out to community member X on the Discord. I saw his post. He actually linked an Amazon link for the collector's edition, and I think Omega and I are very similar in this respect. We're suckers for collector's editions. It comes with, the standard stuff, but it's also got a pretty cool statue and a couple other little things that we're suckers for. The release date on Amazon and the Microsoft Store both 18th. But THQ Nordic, which is the company, the publisher, has yet to confirm that date. So Kingdoms of Amalur, this is, again, so I'm not reading Omega's notes here, but this is me speaking, saying, I liked this game a lot back when it came out. And I thought it was very close to, you can see the MMO roots of it. When you play it, you see how it could have been an MMO. And it definitely had some problems, and it's got an interesting backstory that, in terms of the development process of it. And I think that played in a lot to why it didn't maybe see the success it may have deserved. But I'm definitely hyped for this remastering of it, and I'm curious to see, what exactly is being remastered in it. Is it just a graphical update? Is it a systems update? How far are they going with that? So, and Minus, you said you were pretty excited for this one too, right?
Yeah, when this game came out, I actually was a big fan. I got this massive strategy guide for it, and I used to play it with my ex, actually. We would sit on the couch and she would read the guide and I would play the game, and she'd just kind of be adventuring through the book and telling me secrets that we should look for and kind of playing the game together. And it was a fun experience. But I played a lot of this game and it was really fun. There's a lot of people who've said it's buggy and it's got issues. But I gotta be honest, I remember a couple bugs here and there, but that's not at all the main memory of the game that I had. It was really fun. It was a very vivid world, and it did feel like a single player MMO, and not in a bad way, but pretty good way.
Yeah, I was trying to think back. I'm like, why did I stop playing this game?
I think for me, something else came out. I really do. Yeah. I think something else came out that I tried and got stuck in. And when you step away from a single player RPG, it's hard to get back in.
Oh yeah. Exactly. That's probably exactly what happened, and that happens to me with a lot of games. So I looking in my Steam library, I'm like, I should play that again. But then, of course, now I'll wait until the remaster comes out, but I'll definitely be going in on this one.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for what Omega had set up. There was some other stuff that we just didn't know much about, so we're going to let him talk about that stuff. We don't want to pretend to be Omega. We're just going to do our best impression. So everybody, thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Rewind. Theric, thank you for being versatile and helping us get this done today and working with me. And Omega, we wish the best to you. I hope everything's okay. We'll see him back here for sure sooner than later. Remember, we do have the week off next week of all content, but we'll see you in about a week from today as we start to get back into the regular trend of things. So Theric, have a great day. And to everybody watching and listening, thank you as well.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon Plus related content at Pantheon Plus on Twitter and Pantheon Plus on both Twitch and YouTube. Follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and be sure to follow Omega Contagion at Discord via the name Omega Contagion 6023, and of course in the Facebook group Pantheon MMORPG. Until next time.